Hello and welcome to this very special broadcast. My name is Mohammed Saleh. Now, the American President Donald Trump appears very confident that a nuclear deal can be struck with Iran. Now, speaking at the White House, Donald Trump briefly touched upon the nature of the deal that he wants Tehran to agree to. Now, this is what the American president said. Let me quote him here. Very strong, where we can go in with our inspectors, we can take whatever we want, we can blow up whatever we want, but nobody getting killed, unquote. But the question is obviously this: are these the kind of conditions that are going to be acceptable to Iran? And if not, why does Donald Trump keep insisting that he's very confident of striking a deal with Iran? Now, to give us more insights in terms of what's in fact happening with these negotiations between the United States and Iran, we are joined on this broadcast by Dr. Reza Khanzadeh, who's a senior foreign policy advisor to the US-Iran Chamber of Commerce. Dr. Khanzadeh, thank you very much indeed, sir, for joining us here on WION.
Thanks for having me.
Now, this recent comment by Donald Trump, where he says that we can go in with our inspectors wherever we want, we can take whatever we want and blow up whatever we want of the Iranian nuclear facilities. In your assessment, a comment such as this by the American president, what does it do to the negotiations that are underway between Iran and the United States for a nuclear deal with Iran?
Yeah, I think these types of remarks by President Trump are not taken very seriously by his counterparts in Iran, specifically the negotiating team. Primarily because if we look at the past month now, it's been over a month since they began these talks. April 12th was the first round of talks, and since then until now, Trump has made these bombastic remarks, saying things like, "We will bomb every nuclear site," or "Iran cannot have a nuclear program at all," and then he changes it and says they can have a peaceful civilian program.
Right.
So Iran understands the kind of man they're dealing with when it comes to Trump. And if we go back in time during the Obama administration and see the kind of remarks Obama made, and then how Iran would react, it was almost a mirroring kind of response for Iran when it came to Obama. Obama wasn't very bombastic. He was more diplomatic. He spoke in certain terms. He was very deliberate in the kinds of words he chose to use. And the same could have been seen with his counterparts in Iran. And now we're seeing the same thing with Trump. He's making these outlandish, bombastic remarks. And then at the same time, we also see these types of remarks coming out of Iran. And this is all for the media, for them to show face, for them to save face, for them to kind of appease to their own domestic constituents. But when it comes to sitting at the table, they will continue to have these negotiations. Because like I said, over a month ago now, Trump has made some, outlandish remarks similar to what we just heard, but they continue to have these talks. So I don't think it's going to have really any kind of serious impact on the actual negotiations.
Right. Now, it's interesting that you describe these remarks by Donald Trump as being bombastic. Some would say that he's just unpredictable, that it is difficult to, in fact, sometimes make sense of what Donald Trump actually wants in a negotiation. In your assessment, looking as to how things have progressed, what do you think the Americans are looking for as their final negotiating line? What do you think would be acceptable for the Americans to have for the Iranians?
Well, essentially, I think what we're looking at with the type of deal that the United States would agree to would almost look somewhat identical to what Obama came up with the JCPOA. The only difference would be that Iran's Arab neighbors will be more involved this time as opposed to last time. And also the U.S. businesses would be more involved once or if the deal is signed and then, sanctions are lifted. U.S. companies would have more access to their counterparts in Iran. Because that was two of the main sticking points, I think, as far as why Trump walked out of the deal during his first term. A lot of people say it was because, in spite of Obama, which may be the case. But I think if we look at the psychology of it, the way Trump approached it the first time around, he saw it as a way that the JCPOA helped more European countries, helped China, helped Russia, but did very little for the U.S. economy.
Right.
And if we follow Trump's campaign when he ran for president again, it was all about, U.S. first, U.S. businesses, U.S. companies. So I think the deal will be very similar to the JCPOA in the sense that they will have almost unlimited access to all of Iran's nuclear sites to check and make sure everything is, up to code. And then that way he'll have more deals to make for his constituents, for the U.S. companies inside the United States.
Dr. Khanzadeh, for people who are watching these negotiations closely, there is a certain contradiction between what Donald Trump has said and what Steve Witkoff has said. Now, Donald Trump earlier had said that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. That's the only thing that he does not want Iran to have. But later, Steve Witkoff, his Middle East envoy, went on record to state that even a civil nuclear program by the Iranians would be unacceptable to the Americans. With that being, the starting point for these talks, do you think a deal can even be struck at all?
I do, because, like I said before, Trump has made these comments, and at the same time, a lot of high-ranking officials in Iran have also made these comments, saying things like, "We will always enrich, and the U.S. can't stop us from enriching, and we will." Continue doing what we're doing. So it's going back to that mirroring effect where Trump says, one thing in the media and then Iran counters that. But then at the negotiating table, it's a very different conversation. And we have to keep in mind, again, of the whole psychology of what's going on behind this. This is not just a U.S. and Iran type of transaction or agreement. There are a lot of other actors at stake here as well, particularly the Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE. They really want to see a peaceful deal go through. They don't want to see any more wars or any more attacks. And especially with Israel and what they've been talking about doing, wanting to attack and strike Iran's, nuclear facilities. It is in really everyone's best interest that this deal is made, because again, if we go back during the Obama administration, he even spoke about if a deal is not made, the alternative is war or some type of attack on Iran's facilities. And Trump has made that same kind of comment. Of course, it wasn't as like the way Trump delivered it wasn't as diplomatic as Obama, but it was still delivered in that same context. So everyone understands the magnitude of this agreement, and I think a deal will be made as long as those key actors within the region are included in the conversations.
It's interesting that you mentioned the key actors who are also watching from the sidelines these negotiations very closely, and the state of Israel that has been making a lot of noise, that has been saying a number of different things about Iran's nuclear program. Now, Donald Trump has told the Israelis, this is what he says, that they should not act unilaterally, but there are reports which have been extensively reported in places such as the New York Times, which say that Israel has been carrying out drills to stage some kind of a unilateral attack on Iran's nuclear facilities if the Americans don't want to come on board for an attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. In your assessment, if a deal were to be struck, any deal were to be struck, which gives the Iranians even access to civilian nuclear technology, do you think that would be acceptable for the Israelis?
Unfortunately, I don't. And really what it comes down to is that Israel and, Prime Minister Netanyahu, well, I shouldn't say Israel, but Prime Minister Netanyahu and his coalition, his government, they have beaten this drum of war with Iran for over 20 years. And no matter which U.S. president we have, no matter what kind of negotiations they do or don't do, or what kind of tactics they have or strategy when it comes to sanctions or whatnot, it doesn't change the narrative coming out of Israel. They want to have some type of military, action against Iran.
Right.
What has slowed them down up to this point, and the reason why they haven't gone as far as they wanted to up to this point, is primarily because the U.S. holds, I guess, the last bargaining chip when it comes to Israel, and telling them that if you don't listen to us in this particular instant when it comes to attacking Iran, there are things that we can withhold from you. We can, cut off, military aid. We can cut off intelligence.
Right.
So I think, but at the same time, Israel is very emboldened at this point because of the level of success they've had when it comes to, Hamas and Hezbollah, and, being able to really dismantle those two organizations. And they've had some quite success when it comes to those 3 strikes they've had on Iran and those facilities that they've hit, to where it might come to a point where, Netanyahu might not even listen to Trump, and he could strike, unilaterally. But the fact that he hasn't thus far, and there's been this constant, conversation that he wants to, but he hasn't, still shows that Iran has a bit of strength when it comes to, telling Israel not to attack Iran at this point.
Interesting. Now, my final question to you, Dr. Khanzadeh, is this. What do you think is the red line for Iran? How far are they willing to accommodate the American demands in your assessment? Do you think a civilian nuclear program for the Iranians is a red line? Or do you think the Iranian negotiators would be willing to perhaps forego even that if the Americans keep insisting on this?
No, I definitely believe that their red line is being able to have a nuclear program for civilian use. Now they've made a few comments, again, just like the way Trump makes these bombastic comments, so does certain politicians within Iran. They say, our nuclear program should be and can be whatever we want it to be. It doesn't have to be just, civilian.
Right.
So those comments are made. But again, if we look back during the Obama administration, we didn't hear those comments very much as we are now. And that's because of the mirroring that Iran does, considering who they're having these, negotiations with. But their red line, I do believe, is having a nuclear program that is, civilian, because they don't want to be the next Libya, right? The way Gaddafi, gave up his nuclear program, and then, many years later he was toppled. And this regime is inching closer and closer to having to either revamp or reshape the regime looks, or get close to, the fears or even the realities of it being, either toppled or changed to an extent where it doesn't really look the way it does now.
All right. We'll have to leave there. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Reza Khanzadeh, for joining us with your perspective there.
Thank you very much.